There's a question that has followed Robert James Ritchie for 40 years.
You can give your life to Jesus, and he'll give you a second chance till you can't.
And he has never answered it honestly. Not in interviews, not in songs, not in the carefully constructed mythology he built album by album, tour by tour, controversy by controversy.
There's a man who died for all our sins, hanging from the cross.
The question is simple. Who are you, really? Or the world knows Kid Rock. 35 million albums sold. A Super Bowl performance.
If you're gonna love somebody, hold them as long and as strong and as close as you can, until you can.
Arenas filled from Detroit to Dallas with fans who knew every word. A Nashville honky-tonk with his name on the door. A Tennessee estate with a replica of the White House on the grounds. A phone call away from the Secretary of Defense. But before any of that existed, there was a boy on a 6-acre property in Romeo, Michigan, surrounded by apple orchards and horse stables, watching his father sell cars to working-class families and wondering why he felt like he did not belong to the life he had been given.
Got a dream, chase it, 'cause a dream won't chase you back.
That feeling, the one that tells you the life you were born into is not the life you were meant for, is where this story actually begins. Have you ever felt like you were living someone else's life? Like the world saw a version of you that did not match what you knew to be true inside? Tell me in the comments, because that feeling is the engine that built Kid Rock, and it may be the same engine running underneath your own story. Robert James Ritchie was born January 17th, 1971, in Romeo, Michigan, about 40 miles north of Detroit. His father, William Ritchie, owned multiple car dealerships. The house sat on 6 acres. There were horses, there were orchards. There was money, not extravagant wealth, but the kind of comfortable, visible, upper-middle-class existence that announces itself in the width of the driveway and the quiet hum of security. By any external measure, it was an easy childhood. By any internal measure, something was wrong. The problem was not abuse. It was not neglect. It was something harder to name and therefore harder to escape. It was the feeling that the world he had been handed did not fit him, that the son of a car dealer was supposed to become something specific, something respectable, something that looked like his father's life repeated forward in time, and that whatever Robert Ritchie actually was, it was not that. He found hip-hop in the mid-1980s. Detroit in those years was a city processing collapse. The auto industry that had built the region was failing, factories closed, neighborhoods emptied, and from the wreckage, a sound was emerging that had nothing to do with apple orchards or horse stables or car dealerships. Ritchie started DJing at parties. He learned to rap. He built a persona that was everything his childhood was not. Loud where Romeo was quiet. Aggressive where the suburbs were polite. Working class in presentation even though his actual class was something else entirely. By 17, he had signed his first record deal with Jive Records under the name Kid Rock. Here's the question that matters. Was he running towards something or away from something? The answer, as it usually is with questions like that, is both. He was running toward a version of himself that felt true, and he was running away from a version that had been assigned to him by accident of birth. His debut album, Grits Sandwiches for Breakfast, arrived in 1990. It sold modestly. It generated controversy for explicit content. And then Jive Records looked at the numbers, looked at the controversy, looked at the kid from the 6-acre property who was pretending to be something he was not, and they dropped him. The message was clear. You are not wanted here. Go back to where you came from. That message lands differently depending on who you are. For some people, it is permission to quit. For others, it is fuel. Robert Ritchie heard it and made a decision that would define the next 3 decades of his life. He decided that if the industry would not accept him, he would build his own path until they had no choice. Have you ever been told you were not good enough, not wanted, not the right fit, and had to decide whether to believe them or prove them wrong? What did you choose? Drop your answer below, because the next 8 years of this story are about what that choice costs. The years between 1990 and 1998 are the years nobody talks about when they talk about Kid Rock. They're not glamorous, they're not dramatic. They are just work, relentless and underpaid, and performed in front of crowds that sometimes numbered in the dozens. He released albums on independent labels. He toured the Midwest club circuit. He played bars where the stage was a corner of the room and the payment was a percentage of the door, and the door was not much. He refined a sound that critics dismissed as incoherent. Hip-hop layered over rock, country influences bleeding into metal, genre boundaries treated not as rules, but as suggestions. The industry wanted artists who fit categories. Kid Rock built a category that only he occupied. The audiences who showed up to those clubs did not care about categories. They cared about energy. They cared about the feeling of being in a room where someone was performing like their life depended on it, because for Kid Rock in those years, it did. This is the part of the story that reveals something important. Whatever else you think about Robert Ritchie, whatever conclusions you draw about his later choices, the man spent 8 years in the wilderness being told he did not matter, and he did not stop. That kind of persistence is rare. It does not excuse anything. It does not make someone good or bad, but it is real and it is worth acknowledging. Because most people who are dropped by a major label at 19 do not headline the Super Bowl at 46. Something was driving him that went beyond ambition. Ambition fades when the evidence says you should quit. Whatever was pushing Kid Rock through those years was deeper than wanting to be famous. It was the need to prove that the self he had constructed was more real than the self he had been assigned. The kid from the 6-acre estate was disappearing. The character was becoming the person. Or maybe the character had always been the person and the estate had been the costume. Identity is strange that way. We perform ourselves into existence, and eventually the performance and the performer merge until no one, sometimes not even us, can tell where one ends and the other begins. Devil Without a Cause was released in August 1998 on Atlantic Records. It did not explode immediately. It built momentum slowly, through radio play, through word of mouth, through the accumulated energy of 8 years of club shows creating an audience that the industry had not noticed. Bawitdaba became an anthem. Cowboy followed. The album eventually sold over 14 million copies. Kid Rock performed at Woodstock '99. He dated celebrities. He married Pamela Anderson twice. He became both tabloid fixture and stadium headliner. The kid who had been dropped by Jive Records was suddenly everywhere. Inescapable, a genuine phenomenon. And here is where the story could end if this were a simple success narrative. The underdog wins, the doubters are silenced. Roll credits. But the arrival created a new problem, one that Robert Ritchie has never publicly acknowledged and may never fully understand. The persona that had saved him was now a prison. The working-class rebel who had clawed his way out of the club circuit could not suddenly reveal that he had grown up on a 6-acre estate with horse stables. The mythology was load-bearing now. Too many fans had invested in it. Too much of his identity depended on it. So the gap between Robert Ritchie and Kid Rock widened. The performance became more elaborate. The character became more defined. And somewhere inside, a man who had spent his whole life feeling like he was living the wrong life now found himself living a life that was not entirely his either. Have you ever succeeded at something and then realized that the success trapped you inside a version of yourself you could not escape? That the thing you built to set yourself free had become its own kind of cage? I want to hear about it in the comments, because this tension is the key to everything that happened next. The albums kept coming. Cocky in 2001, Kid Rock in 2003, Rock and Roll Jesus in 2007, which produced All Summer Long, a song that sampled Lynyrd Skynyrd and Warren Zevon and dominated radio that summer with a nostalgia so thick you could taste it. By any metric, he had reached the peak. The arenas filled, the money flowed, the character was complete. But beneath the surface, something was shifting in America. And Kid Rock, whether by instinct or calculation, was shifting with it. He had always been politically complicated. He supported both Republican and Democratic candidates at various points. He opposed the Iraq War while supporting the troops who fought it. He resisted easy categorization, which was precisely what had made his music work. The sound was a hybrid. The politics were too. Then came the Obama years. Then came Trump. And Kid Rock made a choice that divided his audience as sharply as any political line ever drawn in America. The choice was not simply about politics. It was about identity. The working-class persona that had started as self-invention and hardened into mythology now found its natural political home. The resentment that had fueled his early career, the sense of being dismissed by institutions that thought they knew better, the anger at being told who he was supposed to be, all of it mapped onto a political movement that spoke the same language. In 2017, he teased a Senate run in Michigan. He sold Kid Rock for Senate merchandise. He gave speeches that resembled campaign rallies. Political observers debated whether he was serious, whether he could win, whether American democracy had reached a point where celebrity anger could translate into electoral power. He never filed official paperwork. The campaign turned out to be promotional for his album Sweet Southern Sugar. But the attention it generated revealed something that went beyond marketing. Kid Rock was no longer just a musician. He had become a symbol, and symbols do not belong to the people who create them. They belong to the people who need them. Millions of Americans saw in Kid Rock exactly what they wanted to see. A self-made rebel who had been dismissed by elites and proved them wrong. A truth-teller who said what they were thinking. A middle finger raised at everyone who had ever looked down on them. Millions of other Americans saw something else entirely. A rich kid cosplaying as working class. A provocateur who had discovered that outrage was more profitable than music. A symbol of everything wrong with a culture that had replaced substance with performance. Both groups were looking at the same person. Both were absolutely certain they were right. Here is what I want you to consider. Is it possible that both groups were seeing something true? That Kid Rock was simultaneously genuine and performed, authentic and constructed, real and invented? Because identity is not a single thing. It is a negotiation between who we are, who we want to be, who others need us to be, and who we are willing to become to survive. Robert Ritchie negotiated himself into Kid Rock, and Kid Rock negotiated himself into a symbol that no longer fully belonged to Robert Ritchie. What happens when the mask becomes the face? This brings us to a moment that happened in 2025 on a Tennessee estate so extravagant that it features a replica of the White House and a Statue of Liberty. A moment that reveals exactly how much power accumulates when a man spends 40 years performing a version of himself that millions of people need to believe in. Kid Rock was sitting by his pool. 2 Apache helicopter crews from Fort Campbell were conducting a training operation nearby. They deviated from their approved flight path. They flew low over his property. He filmed the flyover on his phone. He posted the video online. What happened next took 7 days and demonstrated something about America that most people have not fully processed. The Army launched a formal investigation immediately. Both pilots were suspended from flight duties. They faced potential career-ending consequences: formal reprimand, loss of flight status, possible discharge. The standard machinery of military discipline began moving forward because the military has rules about unauthorized deviations, and those rules exist for reasons that have nothing to do with celebrity. Kid Rock responded publicly. He pointed out that he had personally invited pilots to fly over his property for years. He framed the suspension as bureaucratic overreach targeting men who were simply being patriotic. The video kept circulating. The story kept building. Then President Trump weighed in, saying the pilots like Kid Rock and that he does too. And then Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth did something that has no precedent in modern military history. He did not go through military channels. He did not wait for the investigation to conclude. He did not consult the chain of command that had initiated the inquiry. He posted Kid Rock's video on social media, and he typed 9 words. Carry on, patriots! The suspensions were lifted immediately. No punishment, no formal resolution, no process. A formal Army investigation was terminated by a social media post. 2 pilots went from facing discharge to being publicly celebrated by the Secretary of Defense in under 7 days. The entire disciplinary system, built over decades to ensure military accountability, was bypassed by a celebrity's viral video and a cabinet official's decision to defend that celebrity's friends. Sit with that for a moment. A man who started as a car dealer's son pretending to be working class now has enough influence that his poolside video can override military procedure at the highest levels of government.
If you wanna love somebody, hold 'em as long and as strong and as close as you can. Take care.
How does that happen? It happens when a persona becomes a symbol. It happens when a symbol becomes a political identity. It happens when a political identity becomes a network of power. It happens one choice at a time over 40 years until the kid from Romeo, Michigan is on the phone with the Secretary of Defense, and the Secretary of Defense is posting his videos and typing, "Carry on, patriots," while investigators are still trying to figure out what protocol requires. This is not a story about whether Kid Rock is good or bad. This is a story about what happens when identity, performance, celebrity, and power merge so completely that they become indistinguishable from each other. Was the helicopter incident an abuse of power? Was it a reasonable correction of bureaucratic overreach? I'm not going to tell you what to think, but I want you to answer this question honestly in the comments, because your answer reveals something about how you see power, celebrity, and accountability in America right now. Robert James Ritchie is now in his mid-50s. He has a son, Robert James Ritchie Jr., born in 1993. There were custody battles. There were reconciliations. There were marriages that ended and marriages that began. In 2022, he married Audrey Berry in a surprise ceremony at the Tennessee estate. The Nashville bar is still open. The Detroit restaurant, Top Dog Records, the merchandise operations that have monetized his brand with the same persistence he applied to the club circuit decades ago. The arenas still fill when he tours. The audience that remains is substantial and fiercely loyal. Whatever one thinks of his evolution, Kid Rock understood something about a segment of America that coastal institutions consistently fail to see. He understood that millions of Americans feel dismissed by the same people who dismissed him. He understood that the feeling of being told you are not wanted, not good enough, not the right kind of person, creates a bond that politics alone cannot explain. Whether that understanding represents genuine solidarity or calculated manipulation is a question that his critics and supporters will never agree on. And perhaps that disagreement is itself the point. Because here is what 40 years of this story reveals. Kid Rock became a mirror. His supporters look at him and see authenticity. They see a man who refused to be what the industry wanted him to be, who built his own path, who speaks truth that polite society will not allow. They see themselves. His critics look at him and see performance. They see a rich kid who invented a working-class persona, who monetized resentment, who discovered that controversy is more profitable than craft. They see everything they fear about American culture. Both groups are looking at the same person. Both are certain they are seeing clearly. And both may be right, because Robert Ritchie and Kid Rock are not the same person. They never were. The character was built to escape a life that did not fit. The character became the career. The career became the symbol. And the symbol became so large that it no longer matters what Robert Ritchie actually thinks or feels or believes. The mirror does not care who is looking into it. It only reflects what the viewer brings. What is the legacy of a man who became a symbol? When historians assess American popular music from the late 20th and early 21st centuries, where does Kid Rock belong? Is he a genre innovator who genuinely blended sounds that had never been combined? Is he a cultural provocateur who rode controversy to commercial success? Is he primarily remembered for a moment when celebrity influence visibly overrode military procedure? The honest answer is that nobody knows. Legacy is not determined by the person who lives it. It is determined by the culture that survives them. But there is something worth remembering beneath all the noise. Before the helicopters and the Senate campaigns and the political speeches, before the tabloid marriages and the Nashville bar and the Tennessee estate, there was a boy in Romeo, Michigan, who felt like he was living the wrong life. He built a new one. He performed it into existence. He refused to stop when the industry told him he was not wanted. And somewhere along the way, the performance swallowed the performer so completely that the question he started with, the one about who he really is, became unanswerable. Maybe that is the tragedy of the story. Or maybe that is the point of all identity. We are all performing versions of ourselves. We all construct who we are from the materials available to us. The difference between most people and Kid Rock is not that he invented a persona. It is that his persona grew so large that millions of people now need it to be true. He cannot stop being Kid Rock, even if he wanted to. The symbol is no longer his. And perhaps the kid from Romeo, Michigan, the one who felt like he did not belong to the life he was given, is still in there somewhere, watching, wondering how he got here, unable to find his way back to a self that existed before the performance began. Or perhaps that kid never existed at all. Perhaps the performance was always the truth, and the 6-acre estate was the lie. We will never know. He may never know. The mirror does not answer questions. It only shows you what you bring to it. If this story made you think about the difference between who you are and who you perform being, hit subscribe. We tell stories about the places where identity, power, and culture collide in ways most people never examine. And before you go, answer this question honestly in the comments. If you had to choose between being seen as who you actually are or being seen as who you wish you were, which would you choose? Your answer matters more than you think. And it might be the same answer Robert Ritchie gave 40 years ago before any of this began.